The emergency room doors exploded inward with a crash that made the fluorescent lights flicker. Blood sprayed across the white tiles in violent arcs as soldiers stumbled through, their uniforms soaked black-red, eyes wide with shock. A young captain collapsed face first, convulsing once before going completely still. His chest didn't rise. The cardiac monitor shrieked, a flat, endless scream that pierced through the sudden chaos. In the corner, pressed against the supply cabinet, like a ghost no one could see, stood a woman in pale blue scrubs. Her face drained of color, her hands trembled against her sides. She stared at the captain's lifeless body like she was watching something claw its way out of her past, something she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it never existed. Everyone saw her the same way they always did, just another nurse. White, quiet, ordinary, easy to ignore. But as the room descended into screaming panic and the doctors fumbled with trembling hands, her expression changed. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went cold. Something buried inside her didn't just wake up, it snapped, and then she moved. Before we go further, stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you want to know what happens next, hit that like button. You won't regret it. The blood pooled faster than anyone expected. It spread across the tiles in a glossy sheet, creeping toward the nurse's station where Sarah Calloway stood frozen, her clipboard still clutched in one hand like a useless shield. She'd worked at Riverside General Hospital in Ashford, Montana for 3 years, and in that time she'd become invisible. Not metaphorically, literally. Doctors walked past her without acknowledgement. Residents snapped orders at her like she was furniture. The senior nurses treated her like a liability they couldn't fire because she never made mistakes big enough to justify the paperwork. "Calloway, get out of the way!" Dr. Marcus Hale barked as he shoved past her, his white coat flaring behind him like a cape. He was the ER's golden boy, 34, Harvard-educated, cocky enough to make residents cry, and charming enough that administration let him. Sarah stepped aside without a word, pressing herself against the wall as more soldiers poured through the doors. There were 8 of them, maybe 9. Hard to count through the blood and the shouting. "Trauma Bay 1! Now!" Hale yelled, pointing at the captain who'd collapsed first. 2 orderlies grabbed the gurney and wheeled it toward the bay, the wheels leaving red streaks on the floor. The captain's face was gray. His dog tags clinked softly against the metal rail. Sarah watched. She always watched. That's what invisible people did. "We need pressure on that femoral artery. Christ, he's losing too much." Hale's voice cracked as he leaned over the captain, his gloved hand slipping in blood. Beside him, Dr. Nina Reyes fumbled with an IV line, her fingers shaking so badly the needle missed the vein twice. "Reyes, get it together." "I'm trying. Trying doesn't stop him from dying." The monitor's shrill alarm cut through the room like a blade. Flatline. No pulse. No breath. The captain's chest lay completely still. "Charging to 200, Hale shouted, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. "Clear!" The captain's body jolted. Nothing. Still flat. "Again, charge to 300. Sarah's fingers tightened around the clipboard until the plastic cracked. She could see it from where she stood, the way Hale's hands were positioned wrong, the way Reyes had missed the subclavian line entirely, the way the anesthesiologist was fumbling with the intubation tube like he'd never done it before under pressure. They were drowning. And the captain was already gone. "Calloway!" Nurse supervisor Janet Brennan's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Stop standing there like a statue and get me more gauze packs from storage. Move!" Sarah didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the captain's face, on the way his lips had gone blue, on the shallow rise and fall of his chest that had stopped entirely now. She knew that face. Not his specifically, but the expression, the stillness. She'd seen it too many times to count. "Calloway, are you deaf?" I said, "Move." The word came out of Sarah's mouth so quietly that at first no one heard it. But there was something in the tone, something flat and cold and absolute that made Brennan's voice die mid-sentence. "What did you just say to me?" Sarah's head turned slowly. Her eyes met Brennan's, and for the first time in 3 years there was no deference in them. No apology. Just a hard, unyielding stare that made Brennan take an involuntary step back. I said, "Move." And then Sarah walked past her. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just walked. straight toward Trauma Bay 1, where Hale was still fumbling with the defibrillator and Reyes was on the verge of tears. The other nurses parted instinctively, like they'd sensed something shift in the air. Sarah stopped at the edge of the gurney, her gaze sweeping across the captain's body with the kind of clinical precision that didn't belong to someone who spent her shifts restocking supplies and taking vitals. "You're losing him," she said. Hale didn't even look up. "I know that, Calloway. If you're not here to help, get out. You're compressing too high. You're missing the heart entirely." That made him pause. He glanced at her, irritation flashing across his face. "Excuse me? Your hand placement is wrong. You're 2 inches too high. You're compressing ribs, not the sternum." And Reyes missed the line. She hit muscle, not vein. "He's not getting fluids." Reyes's face went white. "I didn't—" "Yes, you did." Sarah's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp enough to cut. "Pull it. Start again. Subclavian approach, not jugular. And you—" She turned to the anesthesiologist, a nervous-looking resident named Kim. "Stop trying to force the tube past the vocal cords. You're going to perforate his trachea. Tilt his head back further and use a smaller blade." Kim stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Who do you think you—" "Do it." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, and the tone, military sharp, brook no argument, made Kim's hands move before his brain caught up. Hale finally straightened, his face flushed with anger. "Calloway, you're a nurse. You don't give orders in my ER. Get back to your station before I have you written up." "Charge to 360, Sarah said, ignoring him entirely. Her hands moved to the captain's chest, repositioning over the correct spot with the kind of confidence that didn't come from textbooks. "Clear." "I didn't tell you to—" She pressed the paddles down. The captain's body arced off the table. Beep. The monitor stuttered. One blip, then another. Beep, 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 steady, stable, alive. The room went silent. Not the panicked, chaotic silence from before. This was different. Heavier. Everyone stood frozen, staring at the monitor like it had just performed a miracle. Sarah stepped back, her expression unchanged. "He's stabilizing. Get him to surgery before the bleeding starts again." Hale's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "How did you—" "Move him. Now!" This time no one argued. The orderlies grabbed the gurney and wheeled the captain toward the surgical wing, his heartbeat still echoing faintly on the monitor. Sarah watched them go, her hands steady at her sides. No tremor. No hesitation. Brennan's voice came from behind her, low and venomous. "What the hell was that?" Sarah turned slowly. Brennan's face was red, her eyes blazing with fury. Around them, the other staff had started to whisper, nurses huddled together, shooting glances at Sarah like she'd just sprouted wings. "That," Sarah said quietly, "was me doing my job. Your job is to follow orders, Calloway, not to undermine the attending physician in front of the entire ER. Do you have any idea what you've just saved a man's life?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Brennan's jaw clenched so hard Sarah could hear her teeth grinding. "Get out!" "What?" "You heard me. Get out of my ER. Go to the break room and stay there until I decide what to do with you. And pray to God I don't have you fired for insubordination." Sarah held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The break room was empty. It always was at this hour. Most of the staff were either in the ER or grabbing quick meals in the cafeteria. Sarah sat down at the small table in the corner, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't shake. She didn't cry. She just sat there staring at the wall. The door swung open 10 minutes later. Dr. Hale stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. "That was quite a show," he said. Sarah didn't respond. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Do what?" "Don't play dumb, Calloway. That wasn't nursing. That was trauma surgery. High-level trauma surgery. The kind you don't learn from a textbook." Sarah's eyes flicked up to meet his. "I followed protocol." "Bullshit!" Hale pushed off the door and crossed the room, stopping directly in front of her. "I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've never seen anyone, nurse or doctor, handle a code like that. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you learn it?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, Calloway. It does. Because right now Brennan's upstairs trying to convince administration to fire you for overstepping. And unless you give me a damn good reason why you knew exactly what to do in there, I can't stop her." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stood. She was shorter than Hale by a good 6 inches, but something in the way she held herself made him take an instinctive step back. "I used to work in a different hospital," she said. "A long time ago. I picked up a few things." "What hospital?" "It doesn't matter." "Calloway." "It doesn't matter." Hale stared at her, frustration etched into every line of his face. Then he exhaled sharply and shook his head. "Fine. Keep your secrets, but don't expect me to save your ass when Brennan comes back down here." He left. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. Sarah sat back down. She stared at her hands, at the faint scars along her knuckles, barely visible under the fluorescent lights. Old scars, the kind that came from scalpel slips and shrapnel wounds and 16-hour surgeries in field hospitals where the lights flickered every time a mortar hit close. She'd buried that version of herself 3 years ago, walked away from the uniform, the rank, the operating tents that smelled like blood and diesel fuel. She'd come to Ashford because it was small and quiet, and no one asked questions. She'd taken a nursing job because it was safe, anonymous. She could disappear into the background and never have to think about the things she'd seen. But some things don't stay buried. The intercom crackled to life. "All available staff to the ER. Code black." Repeat. Code black. Code black. Mass casualty event. Sarah's head snapped up. The door burst open again. This time it was Reyes, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Calloway, we need you. Now. Another convoy just arrived. 15 soldiers, maybe more. Multiple GSWs. Blast injuries, severe trauma." Her voice broke. "Hale's already drowning, and Brennan's trying to coordinate, but she's falling apart." Sarah was on her feet before Reyes finished. "How many surgeons on site?" "3, but 2 are in surgery already." "Get me a trauma bay, the biggest one you have." "Calloway, I don't think—" "Reyes," Sarah's voice dropped into that same cold military tone. "Get me a trauma bay. Now." Reyes nodded and bolted. Sarah followed her out into the hallway. The ER was chaos. Worse than before. Blood everywhere. Soldiers sprawled across gurneys, some conscious and screaming, others silent and still. The air reeked of copper and sweat, and something darker, burnt flesh maybe, or the acrid stench of explosives. Brennan stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, barking orders that no one was listening to. Her face was red, her voice shrill with panic. "Bay 3. No, wait. Move him to Bay 2. No, I said, Christ, someone get me a line on that soldier before he bleeds out." Sarah walked past her without a word. She moved through the chaos like she was cutting through water, calm, focused, untouchable. She stopped at the nearest gurney, where a young private lay gasping for breath, his chest rising in shallow, rapid bursts. Pneumothorax, collapsed lung. "Needle decompression kit," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. A nearby nurse, someone Sarah didn't recognize, stared at her blankly. "Now!" The nurse scrambled to obey. Sarah worked fast, hands steady, eyes sharp. She inserted the needle between the private's ribs with the kind of precision that came from doing it 100 times under fire. The private gasped as air hissed out, his chest expanding again. "Chest tube next. Get me a tray and 2 units of O-neg." By the time she finished with the private, 3 more nurses had gathered around her, watching with wide eyes. She moved to the next gurney, then the next. Hemorrhage control. Airway management, IV lines placed with surgical accuracy, every movement efficient, every command obeyed without question. And then, from somewhere behind her, a voice. "Wait, that technique?" Sarah's hands paused. She didn't turn around. "I've seen that before," the voice continued. "It was one of the younger residents, a guy named Park, fresh out of med school. That's the Keller maneuver. No one uses that anymore except—" He stopped. His eyes went wide. "Except military surgeons," he finished slowly. The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward Sarah, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the weight of being seen. But there was no time to process it, because at that exact moment, the ER doors crashed open one more time, and a man in a brigadier general's uniform stormed through, his face carved from stone, his eyes scanning the room with the kind of intensity that made seasoned soldiers flinch. Where's my son? He roared. Every head turned toward the trauma bays, and Sarah's hands, still covered in blood, finally started to shake. The general's boots hit the tile with the kind of authority that made everyone in the room stand straighter without thinking about it. He was tall, 6'3", maybe 6'4", with iron gray hair cropped close to his skull and a jaw that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. His uniform was pristine despite the chaos, every metal and ribbon aligned with mathematical precision. But his eyes were wild, desperate, the kind of desperation that came from a man who'd sent thousands into battle without flinching, but couldn't handle the thought of losing one. I said, "Where's my son?" His voice boomed across the ER like artillery fire. Brennan stepped forward, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "General Hastings, we're doing everything we can to... I didn't ask for a speech. I asked where he is." "Trauma Bay 1, sir, but..." He was already moving. Brennan had to jog to keep up, her heels clicking frantically against the blood-streaked floor. Sarah stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her hands still dripping red, her mind racing. Hastings. She knew that name. Everyone in the military knew that name. 3-star general, decorated combat veteran, commanded half the forces in the Pacific Theater. And his son was the captain she'd just pulled back from the edge, the captain whose heart she'd restarted with technique no civilian nurse should know. "Calloway?" Hale's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He was standing 3 feet away, his expression unreadable. "You need to move. Now." "What?" "Brennan's about to throw you under the bus to save face in front of the general. If you're smart, you'll disappear before..." A crash echoed from Trauma Bay 1, then shouting, the general's voice, loud enough to rattle the walls. "What the hell do you mean he's stable? He was flatlined 10 minutes ago. Who brought him back?" Sarah's stomach dropped. Brennan's voice followed, thin and reedy. "Our team worked together to..." "I didn't ask for corporate double talk. I want a name." Silence. The kind that pressed down on your chest. Then Brennan spoke again, and Sarah could hear the venom in every syllable. "One of our nurses, Sarah Calloway. But I have to inform you, General, that she acted outside protocol and... Where is she?" Sarah's feet moved before her brain caught up. She walked toward Trauma Bay 1, pushing through the cluster of nurses and residents who'd gathered like vultures. The crowd parted. They always did now. Something had shifted in the last 20 minutes. She could feel it in the way people looked at her. Not invisible anymore. Not ignored. Feared, maybe. Or something close to it. She stepped into the bay. The general stood next to his son's gurney, one hand gripping the rail hard enough to turn his knuckles white. The captain, Hastings' son, was unconscious but breathing, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. An IV drip fed into his arm. His color was better. Not good, but better. The general's eyes locked onto Sarah the second she entered. He studied her with the kind of intensity that made experienced soldiers squirm. She met his gaze without flinching. "You're Calloway." "Yes, sir." "You brought him back." It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't answer. Hastings took a step toward her. Then another. He stopped close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his stubble, the deep lines carved around his eyes. "Do you have any idea how close he came to dying?" "Yes, sir. I was there." "And you pulled him back?" His voice dropped lower, quieter, dangerous. "With a technique I haven't seen used outside of a combat zone in 15 years. So I'm going to ask you one time, Nurse Calloway, where did you learn to do that?" Behind him, Brennan shifted nervously. Hale stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with the kind of focus usually reserved for train wrecks. Sarah's jaw tightened. "I picked it up along the way." "Don't insult my intelligence." The general's voice hardened into something that could cut steel. "That was the Keller maneuver, battlefield-grade trauma response. No civilian hospital teaches it, no nursing program covers it. So unless you've got a very good explanation, I suggest you start talking." The room held its breath. Sarah stood perfectly still, her bloodied hands hanging at her sides. For 3 years, she'd kept her head down, stayed quiet. Let them treat her like she was nobody. Because being nobody meant being safe, being forgotten, being able to sleep at night without dreaming about the smell of burnt flesh and the sound of choppers overhead and the weight of a scalpel in her hand while someone screamed for their mother. But standing here, With the general's eyes boring into her and his son's heartbeat beeping steadily on the monitor and the entire ER staff watching from the doorway, she realized something. She was tired of running. "I was a surgeon," she said quietly. "Army, deployed 3 times, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria for 6 months before—" She stopped, swallowed. "Before I came home." The silence that followed was suffocating. Brennan's face went white. "You never listed military service on your application? You never asked." "That's not—" "You're required to disclose—" "I disclosed what you needed to know. I'm a registered nurse, licensed, clean record. Everything else is none of your business." Brennan's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning on dry land. This is grounds for immediate termination. You lied on your—" "I didn't lie." Sarah's voice stayed calm, but something underneath it had teeth. "I left information out. There's a difference." "Not legally, there isn't." "Enough!" The general's voice cracked like a whip. Brennan shut her mouth so fast her teeth clicked. He turned back to Sarah, his expression still hard, but something else flickering behind it now. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "What was your rank?" "Major." "Specialty?" "Trauma, field surgery. I ran a forward surgical team for 18 months. "Why'd you leave?" Sarah's hands curled into fists. "That's personal." "Major, when you save my son's life, nothing's personal anymore." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that came from too many deployments and too many folded flags handed to too many widows. "I need to know who I'm thanking." Something in his tone cracked through her defenses. Sarah exhaled slowly. "I lost someone. A patient. 18 years old, shrapnel through the chest, no time to get him to a real hospital. I did everything right, everything, but sometimes that's not enough." She paused. "I couldn't do it anymore, so I left. Came here. Took a job where I didn't have to make those calls." The general studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he extended his hand. "Thank you, Major Calloway. You gave me back my son." Sarah stared at his hand. Then she shook it. His grip was firm, steady. "He's not out of the woods yet," she said. "He needs surgery. Real surgery. The hemorrhage is controlled, but there's still internal bleeding I couldn't reach. He's got maybe 4 hours before—" "I'll have a surgical team here in 2. The general released her hand and pulled out his phone, already dialing. "And Major, you're coming with me to oversee it." "Sir, I'm not authorized to eat—" "You are now. Consider yourself reinstated." "General, I don't think you have the authority to—" "Try me." The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Hastings started barking orders in the clipped, no-nonsense tone of a man who expected immediate obedience and usually got it. Sarah stood frozen, her mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. Brennan's voice cut through the haze. "This is completely unacceptable. General Hastings, with all due respect, you cannot just walk into my hospital and—" "Your hospital?" The general didn't even look up from his phone. "Last I checked, Riverside General receives federal funding, which means I can do whatever the hell I want. Now, unless you'd like me to have a very uncomfortable conversation with your board of directors about how your incompetence nearly killed a decorated combat officer, I suggest you step aside." Brennan's face turned scarlet. Her mouth worked soundlessly. Hale cleared his throat from the doorway. "General, if I may—" Major Calloway did act outside standard protocol. "Not that I'm disagreeing with the results, but nothing, Doctor. She saved a life. Your protocol was killing him." The general's eyes snapped to Hale with laser focus. "Were you the attending on my son's case?" "Yes, sir." "Then let me be clear. If she hadn't stepped in, you'd be explaining to me right now why my boy died on your table. So unless you want that conversation, I'd recommend shutting your mouth and being grateful." Hale's face went blank. He took a step back. The general turned to Sarah. 2 hours. Surgical teams en route. I need you to brief them on his condition and stay through the operation. Non-negotiable." "Sir, I haven't practiced in 3 years. You practiced 20 minutes ago, and my son's alive because of it." "That's good enough for me." He paused. "Unless you're telling me you can't do it." It was a challenge. They both knew it. Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'll do it." "Good. Now someone get her scrubs that aren't covered in blood and show me where I can wait without people staring at me like I'm about to start shooting." The next 2 hours moved in a blur. Sarah scrubbed the blood off her hands and arms in the staff bathroom, watching the water run red down the drain. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, jaw tight, eyes hard, face pale under the fluorescent lights. She barely recognized herself. 3 years of hiding had softened her edges, made her forgettable. That woman was gone now. She changed into fresh scrubs and found her way to the surgical prep room, where 2 Army surgeons had already arrived via helicopter. Colonel Peters was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with steady hands and a reputation for working miracles in combat zones. His partner, Captain Ortiz, was younger, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, quick-moving. They both looked at Sarah like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. "You're the major who brought him back," Peters said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Heard you use the Keller maneuver." "I did what needed to be done," Peters grunted. "Fair enough. Walk us through his condition." Sarah did. She spoke quickly, efficiently, rattling off details with the kind of precision that came from years of doing this exact thing. Vitals, injuries, hemorrhage location, estimated blood loss. Peters and Ortiz listened without interrupting, exchanging glances that Sarah couldn't quite read. When she finished, Peters crossed his arms. "You said you've been out for 3 years." "Yes, sir." "Doesn't show. That was a flawless brief." He paused. "Why'd you leave?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Personal reasons." "Can you still operate?" "I don't know." It was the truth. She hadn't held a scalpel in 3 years, hadn't stood over an open chest cavity or clamped an artery or made a call that meant life or death. She'd spent the last 1,000 days hiding from that version of herself. And now here she was, about to step back into the fire. Peter studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You'll assist. Ortiz and I will lead, but I want your eyes on the field. If you see something we don't, speak up. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Let's move." The surgery took 4 hours. Sarah stood at the edge of the operating table, masked and gloved, her eyes tracking every movement Peters and Ortiz made. The captain's chest lay open, his heart beating steadily under the bright surgical lights. Blood pooled in the cavity. Peters worked with calm efficiency, his hands moving like clockwork. Ortiz called out vitals every few minutes, and Sarah watched. She saw the bleeder before Peters did, a small arterial tear hidden behind the liver. "Colonel, 3 o'clock. Hepatic artery." Peters's eyes flicked to where she'd indicated. "Good catch. Clamp." The nurse handed him the instrument. He clamped it. The bleeding stopped. 20 minutes later, Sarah spotted another issue, a hairline fracture in the 6th rib that was dangerously close to puncturing the lung. "Rib stabilization, 6, lateral side." Peters paused, glanced at the monitor, then nodded. "You're right. Ortiz, get me a plate." By the time they closed, Sarah had called out 6 potential complications. Peters had listened to everyone. When the final suture went in and the captain's vitals held steady, Peters stepped back and pulled down his mask. "Hell of a job, Major." "You did the work, sir. We did it together." He glanced at Ortiz, who nodded in agreement. "You've still got it. Whatever made you leave? I don't know what it was, but you're wasted as a floor nurse." Sarah didn't respond. She just stared at the captain's closed chest, at the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The clarity, the focus, the weight of holding someone's life in your hands and refusing to let go. She'd forgotten that it felt like coming home. The recovery room was quiet. The general sat in a plastic chair next to his son's bed, his uniform jacket draped over the armrest. He looked older now, tired, human. Sarah stood in the doorway, unsure if she should enter. "Come in, Major." The general's voice was softer now, rough around the edges. She stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. "He's stable," she said. "Surgery went well. Barring complications, he should make a full recovery." The general exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "You already said that, sir." "I'll say it as many times as I damn well please." He looked up at her, and for the first time since he'd stormed into the ER, his expression wasn't hard, just grateful. "You didn't have to do what you did. You could have stayed quiet. Let someone else handle it." "No, sir, I couldn't." "Why not?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I remember what it's like to lose someone on the table, and I wasn't going to let it happen again." The general nodded slowly. He stood, joints creaking, and extended his hand again. I owe you a debt, Major Calloway. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, you name it. Sarah shook his hand. Just take care of your son, sir. I will. He paused. But I meant what I said earlier. You're wasted here. If you ever want to come back, officially, there's a place for you. I'll make sure of it. Thank you, sir. But I'm not ready for that. Fair enough. Offer stands. He released her hand and glanced back at his son. Get some rest, Major. You've earned it. Sarah left the recovery room and walked back through the ER. The chaos had died down. Most of the soldiers had been stabilized or moved to surgery. The floor was still stained red in places, but the frantic energy had dissipated into exhausted silence. Nurses moved like ghosts. Residents slumped against walls. Hale sat at the nurses' station, staring at nothing. And Brennan stood in the center of it all, arms crossed, eyes locked on Sarah the moment she appeared. My office, Brennan said. Now. Sarah followed her down the hallway to the administrative wing. Brennan's office was small and cluttered, filing cabinets overflowing with paperwork, a desk buried under folders, a dying plant in the corner. Brennan closed the door and turned to face Sarah with barely controlled fury. You humiliated me. Sarah said nothing. In front of a 3-star general, in front of my entire staff, you made me look incompetent. I saved a man's life. You undermined my authority. Brennan's voice cracked. I am your supervisor, Calloway. You don't get to just take over my ER and start barking orders like you own the place. Your ER was failing. Your doctors were drowning. If I hadn't stepped in, that captain would be dead. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. Sarah's voice stayed calm, but something underneath it was steel. You want to fire me for saving a life? Go ahead. But you'll have to explain to the board why you prioritized ego over patient care. And I guarantee the general will have something to say about it. Brennan's face turned purple. You think you're untouchable now because some general thanked you? You're nothing, Calloway. Just a washed-up army surgeon playing nurse because you couldn't handle the real work anymore. The words hit harder than Sarah expected. She felt them land somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where she kept all the things she didn't want to think about. The patient she'd lost. The kid who'd bled out on her table while she tried everything and it still wasn't enough. The sound of his last breath. But she didn't flinch. If that's what you need to believe, Sarah said quietly, then believe it. She turned to leave. We're not done. Yes, we are. Sarah walked out. She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. The hallway was empty, silent. She made it halfway to the exit before her legs gave out. She caught herself against the wall, breathing hard, her hands shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the plaster to stop the tremors. 3 years. She'd kept it buried for 3 years. And now it was all flooding back, every surgery, every code, every time she'd held someone's life in her hands and felt the weight of it crushing her. She'd saved the captain, but the cost of remembering how to do it was higher than she'd expected. Calloway. She looked up. Hale stood at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. You okay? I'm fine. You don't look fine. Sarah straightened, forcing her hands to steady. What do you want, doctor? Hale took a few steps closer. I wanted to say I'm sorry. That caught her off guard. For what? For not listening, for dismissing you, for... He exhaled slowly. For treating you like you didn't matter. You do. And what you did today, that was incredible. Sarah stared at him, trying to find the trap. But his expression was sincere. Thank you, she said finally. I talked to Peters before he left. He told me you called out 6 complications during surgery. 6. Most surgeons would have missed half of them. Hale paused. Why the hell are you working as a floor nurse? Because it's easier than the alternative. Is it? Sarah didn't answer. Hale studied her for a moment longer, then he nodded. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call today. And if Brennan tries to fire you, I'll fight it. Why? Because you're the best thing that's happened to this ER in years, and I'm not stupid enough to let that walk away. He turned to leave, then paused. Get some rest, Calloway. You look like you're about to fall over. He left. Sarah stood alone in the hallway, her reflection staring back at her from the dark window across the hall. She looked like a ghost, Maybe she was. She made it to the parking lot before the exhaustion hit. Her shift had ended hours ago, but she'd stayed through the surgery, through the recovery, through Brennan's tirade. Now it was almost midnight and the lot was empty except for a handful of cars scattered under flickering streetlights. She unlocked her car, a beat-up Honda with rust spots and a broken taillight, and slid into the driver's seat. Her hands were still shaking. She gripped the steering wheel and closed her eyes, trying to breathe. A knock on the window made her jump. She looked up. A man stood outside, late 30s, dark suit, military bearing. He held up an ID badge. Defense Intelligence. Sarah's blood went cold. She rolled down the window an inch. "Can I help you?" "Major Sarah Calloway? I'm not a major anymore." "That's not what General Hastings says." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Agent Ross. I need to ask you a few questions about your time in Syria." "I don't talk about Syria. I understand, but I'm afraid this isn't optional." Ross pulled out a folder and held it up to the window. "We've reopened an investigation into a classified incident that occurred during your deployment. 6 soldiers died. You were the attending surgeon, and we have reason to believe you know more than you've disclosed." Sarah's heart stopped. "I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do." Ross's smile vanished. "We can do this here, or we can do it at the regional office. Your choice." Sarah stared at him through the glass, her mind racing. Syria, 6 soldiers. The incident she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The thing that had driven her out of the military in the first place. And now it was standing in a parking lot at midnight, demanding answers she didn't want to give. Ross tapped the folder against the window. "Clock's ticking, Major." Sarah's hand moved to the door lock, but Ross was already shaking his head. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Major." His voice carried the kind of flat authority that came from years of dealing with people who thought they could run. "I've got 2 agents in a vehicle across the lot. You try to drive off, we follow. You refuse to cooperate, we escalate. So let's skip the theatrics and have a conversation like adults." Sarah's fingers stayed on the lock. "I'm not talking about Syria." "Then you're talking about it at the regional office, in a room with no windows and a recording device. Your choice." She stared at him through the glass, her mind racing through options that all ended the same way. Ross wasn't bluffing. She could see it in his posture, in the way he held that folder like it contained her entire life. And maybe it did. Syria had been the end of everything. Her career, her sense of purpose, the belief that she could save anyone if she just worked hard enough. 6 soldiers. All dead. All on her table. And the reason why was buried so deep even she didn't want to look at it. 1 hour, she said finally. "That's all you get." Ross smiled. "That'll do. There's a diner 2 blocks north. Meet me there in 10 minutes. Come alone. And if I don't show? Then I show up at your apartment with a warrant, and we do this the hard way." He tapped the folder against the window one more time. 10 minutes, Major. Don't keep me waiting." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows between parked cars. A few seconds later, an unmarked sedan pulled out from the far corner of the lot and drove past her, slow enough that she could see the silhouettes of 2 more agents inside. Sarah sat frozen, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She should have seen this coming, should have known that saving the general's son would drag everything back to the surface. The military didn't forgive or forget. And Syria was the kind of mess that stayed buried only as long as nobody looked too close. Now someone was looking. She started the car and drove north, following the same route she took every day to and from work. The streets were empty at this hour, streetlights casting long shadows across cracked pavement. Ashford was the kind of town where nothing happened. Quiet, forgettable, safe. She'd chosen it for exactly that reason, but safety was an illusion. She knew that now. The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Maple, a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign that read Rosie's. Half the letters were burnt out. Sarah pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. Through the window, she could see Ross sitting in a booth near the back, 2 cups of coffee already on the table. She got out and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed. A tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter, but didn't say anything. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Ross gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." Sarah slid into the booth. The vinyl was cracked, stuffing poking through in places. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup but didn't drink. Ross opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. Sarah's stomach turned. She recognized them immediately. The field hospital in northeastern Syria, the operating tent with its blood-stained floors, and 6 body bags lined up outside waiting for transport. March 18th, 3 years ago, Ross said. You were the lead surgeon at Forward Operating Base Tanner. A convoy got hit by an IED 5 clicks out. 6 casualties came in, all critical. You operated on all 6, he paused, and all 6 died. Sarah's jaw tightened. I did everything I could. I'm sure you did. But here's the thing. 3 of those soldiers should have survived. According to the after-action report, their injuries were survivable, but they didn't make it. And when investigators tried to figure out why, they found some interesting discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Ross pulled out another document, a medical report, heavily redacted. Supply logs show you requested 40 units of O-negative blood 2 days before the convoy got hit, but when investigators checked inventory after the incident, they only found 12 units. 28 units disappeared. Care to explain where they went? Sarah's hands tightened around the coffee cup. I don't remember. You don't remember requesting blood? I requested supplies all the time. We were in the middle of a war zone. Shortages were constant. Fair enough. But here's the interesting part. The supply officer who processed your request was killed in a mortar attack the day after the convoy incident. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? What are you implying? Ross leaned back, his expression unreadable. I'm not implying anything, Major. I'm stating facts. 28 units of blood vanished. 3 soldiers died who shouldn't have. And the one person who could verify your supply request is dead. That's a lot of coincidences. Sarah felt her pulse hammering in her ears. You think I stole blood? I think something happened at FOB Tanner that didn't make it into the official report. And I think you know what it was. I don't. Then why'd you leave the military 3 weeks later? No transition period, no debriefing, just a resignation letter and a one-way ticket to Montana. That's not normal behavior for a decorated combat surgeon. Sarah stared at the photographs on the table. 6 body bags. She could still remember their faces. Private First Class Daniels, 20 years old, bled out from a femoral artery tear because they didn't have enough clamps. Sergeant Morrison, crushed chest, asphyxiated because the ventilator failed mid-surgery. Corporal Hayes, shrapnel through the liver, septic shock that came on too fast to stop. And 3 others whose names she'd forced herself to forget. I left because I couldn't do it anymore, she said quietly. Every day was triage. Every surgery was a gamble. And no matter how hard I worked, people kept dying, so I left. That's the official story, but I don't buy it. Ross tapped one of the photographs. You were one of the best trauma surgeons in the military. You had a 93% survival rate. That's almost unheard of in combat medicine. So what changed? Syria changed. The resources weren't there. The support wasn't there. We were operating on fumes and prayer. Then why not request a transfer? Why resign entirely? Sarah didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the real reason was sitting in those photographs. In the missing blood units. In the supply officer who died before anyone could ask him the right questions. Ross watched her in silence for a long moment. Then he gathered the photographs and slid them back into the folder. Here's what I think happened. I think you made a call. A hard call. The kind surgeons have to make in war zones when there's not enough to go around. And I think someone died because of it. Maybe more than one someone. Sarah's throat tightened. And I think you've been running from that call ever since. Ross closed the folder. But here's the problem, Major. That convoy, one of the soldiers who died was the nephew of a senator, Senator Mallory. Ever heard of him? Sarah's blood went cold. Mallory, chair of the Armed Services Committee, one of the most powerful men in Washington. He's been pushing for a reinvestigation for 3 years, Ross continued, and now that you've made yourself visible again, saved a general's son, got your name in reports, he's got ammunition. He wants answers, and he's not going to stop until he gets them. What do you want from me? The truth. What happened to that blood? Where did it go? Sarah stared at the table. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a car drove past, headlights sweeping across the diner windows. I gave it to someone else, she said finally. Ross leaned forward. Who? A civilian. A girl. Maybe 16, 17, caught in crossfire, abdominal wound, hemorrhaging badly. She wasn't military, wasn't even supposed to be at the base, but she was dying and I had the blood. and I made a choice. You diverted military resources to a civilian. I saved a life. You violated protocol. Protocol would have let her die. Sarah's voice hardened. I was a surgeon. My job was to save people. I don't care what their uniform says. Ross was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a pen and notepad. I need details. The girl's name. Where she came from. What happened to her after? I don't know. You don't know or you won't say? I don't know. She disappeared after recovery. No records, no follow-up, like she was never there. That's convenient. That's the truth. Ross studied her, his expression skeptical. You realize what this means, right? If Mallory finds out you prioritized a civilian over his nephew was already dying. Nothing I did would have changed that, but the girl had a chance, so I took it. And the other 2 soldiers who died? Sarah's jaw tightened. They died because we didn't have enough. Not enough blood, not enough equipment, not enough time. I did everything I could with what I had. It wasn't enough. Ross scribbled something in his notepad. The senator's not going to accept that answer. Then the senator can come ask me himself. He might. He's got enough pull to subpoena you, drag you in front of a committee, make you testify under oath. Ross paused. That what you want? Your name all over the news? Every decision you made in Syria picked apart by politicians who've never seen combat? Sarah's hands curled into fists under the table. What's the alternative? Cooperate. Give us a full statement. Let us close the investigation quietly. Mallory might not like the answers, but if we can show you acted in good faith, made a tough call under impossible circumstances, he might back off. And if he doesn't, then you'd better get a good lawyer. Ross stood, dropping a $10 bill on the table for the coffee. Think about it, Major, but don't think too long. Mallory's already making calls. You've got maybe 48 hours before this goes public. He paused at the edge of the booth. For what it's worth. I believe you. I think you made a call and it cost you everything. But belief doesn't matter in Washington. Only optics. And right now your optics are bad. He walked out. The bell above the door chimed again. Sarah sat alone in his booth, staring at the cold coffee. Her reflection wavered in the dark window, pale, hollow-eyed, exhausted. She looked like someone who'd been running for 3 years and finally hit a wall. Maybe she had. She left the diner and drove home on autopilot, her mind spinning through everything Ross had said. Senator Mallory. Reinvestigation. Subpoena. Testimony. Her life dissected on national television while people who'd never held a scalpel or made a life-or-death call judged every decision she'd made. Her apartment was a small one-bedroom on the edge of town, 3rd floor of a building that smelled like mildew and old carpet. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was oppressive. She dropped her keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, still wearing her scrubs. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. We need to talk, not about Syria, about today. Meet me at the hospital, midnight, come alone. Peters. Sarah stared at the message. Peters. The colonel who'd led the surgery on the general's son. Why would he want to meet at midnight? She almost ignored it, almost stayed on the couch and let the exhaustion drag her under. But something in the message nagged at her. The urgency, the secrecy. She stood, grabbed her jacket, and headed back out. The hospital was nearly empty when she arrived. Night shift had taken over. Skeleton crew, mostly residents, and a handful of nurses. The lights in the main corridor were dimmed. Her footsteps echoed on the tile. She found Peters in the doctor's lounge on the 3rd floor. He was alone, still in his fatigues, a cup of coffee in one hand. He looked up when she entered. Thanks for coming. Sarah closed the door behind her. What's this about? Your past. Peters set down the coffee. I did some digging after the surgery, wanted to know who I was working with. Your record's impressive. Right up until Syria. Sarah's stomach dropped. If you're here to lecture me, I'm here to warn you. Peter's voice was low, urgent. Mallory's not just pushing for an investigation. He's building a case, criminal charges, negligent homicide, theft of military property. He wants you in prison, Calloway. How do you know that? Because I got a call from Defense Intelligence 2 hours ago. They asked about you, about the surgery today, about whether you showed signs of instability or poor judgment. Peters leaned forward. They're looking for ammunition, anything they can use to paint you as incompetent or reckless. What did you tell them? That you're one of the best surgeons I've ever worked with. That you saved a man's life today when no one else could. That if they want to go after you, they'll have to go through me first. He paused. But I'm not enough. Mallory's got resources, political connections. He's going to bury you unless you fight back. How? Go public. Tell your side of the story before he twists it. Get ahead of the narrative. Sarah shook her head. I'm not dragging a dead girl into the media circus just to save myself. Then you're going to lose. Peter's voice was blunt. Mallory doesn't care about the truth. He cares about revenge. His nephew died and someone's got to pay for it. Right now, that someone is you. Then I'll pay. Calloway, I made a choice in Syria. I stand by it. If Mallory wants to destroy me for saving a life, then let him try. Sarah's voice was steady, but something underneath it was breaking. I'm done running. Peter studied her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. All right, but if you're going to stand your ground, you'd better be ready for what's coming, because Mallory's not going to stop until you're finished. I know. Peters pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. My personal number. If things get bad, and they will, call me. I'll do what I can. Sarah took the card. Why are you helping me? Because what you did today reminded me why I became a surgeon in the first place. To save lives. Not to play politics or cover my ass. Just to save lives. He paused. And because I've seen what happens when good people get crushed by bad systems. I'm not going to let it happen to you without a fight. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. She left the lounge and walked back through the empty corridors. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. This time from General Hastings. Heard about DIA visit? Don't talk to them without a lawyer. I'm making calls. Stand by. Sarah stared at the message. The general was using his pull. Peters was backing her. Even Hale had offered support earlier. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. But it didn't change the facts. 6 soldiers had died in Syria. She'd made a call, saved a civilian, lost military personnel. And now someone with power and rage wanted her to pay for it. She made it to the parking lot before she saw them. 2 black SUVs parked near the entrance, engines running, men in suits standing beside them. Not DIA this time. Something worse. One of them stepped forward as she approached. Older, gray-haired, expensive suit. He held up an ID badge. Office of the Inspector General. Major Sarah Calloway? Sarah stopped walking. Yes. I'm Inspector Grant. I have a warrant for your detention pending a formal investigation into actions taken during your deployment to Syria. You're required to come with us for questioning. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. I already spoke to DIA tonight. This is separate. Senator Mallory has invoked executive privilege. You're being detained under military jurisdiction. Grant's voice was flat, professional. You have the right to legal counsel. If you resist, we're authorized to use force. Sarah looked around. The parking lot was empty. No witnesses, no help. Just her and 6 federal agents with the power to make her disappear into the system. How long? As long as it takes. She could run, could try to get back inside the hospital, make a scene, force them to arrest her publicly, but that would only make things worse. Mallory wanted a spectacle. She wasn't going to give him one. I want a lawyer present. That's your right, but questioning begins in 2 hours. If your lawyer can't make it by then, we proceed without them. 2 hours. Middle of the night. No way any lawyer could get here in time. Grant gestured to one of the SUVs. Let's go, Major. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Don't say anything. She looked up. Across the parking lot, half hidden in shadow, stood a figure. Tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket. She couldn't see the face, but something about the posture was familiar. The figure nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness. Sarah's pulse spiked. Who the hell was that? Major, now! Grant's voice hardened. She put the phone away and walked toward the SUV. One of the agents opened the back door. She climbed inside. The door closed with a heavy thunk. No handles on the inside. The SUV pulled out of the lot and headed south, away from the hospital, away from Ashford, toward the federal building 40 miles away. Sarah sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, mind racing. Mallory had moved faster than she'd expected. Peters's warning hadn't been exaggerated. They were coming for her, hard and fast. But that text, don't say anything. Who sent it? And how did they know she'd be in the parking lot at that exact moment? The SUV turned onto the highway. Darkness stretched in every direction. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to slow her breathing. She'd survived war zones, survived impossible surgeries, survived 3 years of hiding from her past. She could survive this. She had to. The federal building was a concrete monstrosity on the outskirts of Helena, all sharp angles and narrow windows. They brought her in through a side entrance, away from security cameras. Grant led her down a series of hallways to a small room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a recorder mounted on the wall. Sit. Sarah sat. Grant took the chair across from her. One of the other agents stood by the door. "This interview is being recorded," Grant said. "State your name and rank for the record." "Sarah Calloway, former Major, United States Army Medical Corps. You understand you're being questioned under military authority regarding actions taken during your deployment to Forward Operating Base Tanner, Syria, in March 3 years ago." "I understand." "Do you wish to have legal counsel present?" "Yes." "Noted. However, we're proceeding with preliminary questioning. You may decline to answer." Grant opened a folder, thicker than Ross's, filled with documents Sarah couldn't read from across the table. "On March 18th, 6 soldiers under your care died following an IED attack. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Can you explain why 3 of those soldiers, whose injuries were classified as survivable, did not survive?" Sarah met his eyes. "Insufficient resources. Insufficient blood supply. Insufficient time. Supply logs indicate you requisitioned 40 units of O-negative blood 2 days prior. Where did that blood go?" "I used it." "On whom?" Sarah hesitated. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the recorder. "On patients." "Military patients?" Another pause. "Answer the question, Major." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Not exclusively." Grant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You used military resources on non-military personnel." "I used medical resources on people who needed them." "That's a violation of protocol." "Protocol doesn't account for reality." "Reality, Major, is that 3 American soldiers died while you diverted supplies to unauthorized personnel. That's not a judgment call. That's criminal negligence." "Those soldiers were dying regardless. I did everything I could." "Everything except follow orders." Grant leaned forward. "You took an oath to protect and serve American military personnel, not civilians, not enemy combatants, Americans, and you violated that oath." Sarah's hands curled into fists under the table. "I took an oath to do no harm. That doesn't come with conditions." "It does when you're wearing a uniform." The door opened. A woman entered, mid-50s, sharp suit, briefcase in hand. She glanced at Grant with an expression that could freeze nitrogen. "Inspector Grant, I'm Margaret Keating, counsel for Major Calloway. This interview is over." Grant didn't move. "We're in the middle of an illegal detention. My client was brought here under false pretenses, questioned without adequate legal representation, and held without formal charges." Keating set her briefcase on the table with a thud. "Unless you're planning to charge her right now, and I mean right now, she's leaving." Grant's jaw tightened. Senator Mallory authorized this investigation. Senator Mallory doesn't have the authority to bypass due process. My client is a civilian. If you want to question her, you file charges and we go through proper channels. Until then, she's walking out of here." Grant stared at Keating for a long moment. Then he closed the folder and stood. "This isn't over." "No, it's not. But it's over for tonight." Keating turned to Sarah. "Let's go." Sarah stood on shaky legs and followed Keating out of the room, down the hallway, through the side entrance. They didn't speak until they were outside, standing next to a black sedan parked in the visitor lot. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "Someone who doesn't like watching good people get railroaded." Keating unlocked the car. "Get in. I'll drive you back to Ashford." Sarah climbed into the passenger seat. Keating started the engine and pulled out of the lot. "How did you know I was here?" "I got a call. Anonymous tip. Said you'd been detained illegally and needed representation." Keating glanced at her. "You've got friends in high places, Major. Use them." I don't have friends. Then you've got enemies who are scared of you, which is almost as good. They drove in silence for a while. Sarah stared out the window at the darkness rushing past. What happens now? She asked finally. Now we prepare. Mallory's going to come at you hard. Media, hearings, formal charges, everything. We need to get ahead of it. Build a defense. Find witnesses who will support your version of events. There aren't any. Everyone who was at FOB Tanner that day is either dead or deployed. Then we find something else. Keating's voice was firm. You saved a general's son today. That counts for something. We use it. Sarah shook her head. I'm not dragging the general into this. You won't have to. He'll drag himself in. Men like Hastings don't forget debts. Keating paused. But here's the hard truth, Major. If we can't prove you acted in good faith, if we can't show that your decisions saved more lives than they cost, Mallory wins, and you go to prison. For how long? 10 years. Maybe more. Sarah closed her eyes. 10 years. For saving a girl's life. There's one other option, Keating said quietly. What? Make a deal. Plead to lesser charges, accept a dishonorable discharge and probation. Mallory gets his pound of flesh, you stay out of prison. No. Sarah, I said no. I'm not pleading guilty to saving someone's life. If Mallory wants to destroy me for that, then he can look me in the eye while he does it. Keating was silent for a moment. Then she smiled, small, grim, approving. All right, then we fight. They pulled into Ashford just before dawn. The sky was starting to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. Keating stopped in front of Sarah's apartment building. Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. Later today, I guess. I'll start pulling records, contacting witnesses. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone. Not DIA, not Inspector General, not even friendly reporters. Everything goes through me. Understood? Sarah nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. Keating handed her a business card. My cell's on there. Call any time. Sarah climbed out and watched the sedan drive away. Then she turned and walked into the building, up the stairs, into her apartment. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, finally letting the exhaustion take over. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. You did the right thing tonight. Stay strong. They're coming for you, but you're not alone. A friend, Sarah stared at the message. A friend? Who? She typed back. Who is this? No response. She set the phone down and collapsed onto the couch. Her body ached. Her mind screamed for rest, but sleep wouldn't come, because somewhere out there, Senator Mallory was planning his next move. Inspector Grant was building his case, and a mysterious stranger was sending cryptic messages like she was some kind of chess piece in a game she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Syria anymore. This was about something bigger, something that had been set in motion the moment she'd stepped forward in that ER and refused to stay invisible. And whoever was pulling the strings knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah's phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call. She glanced at the screen. General Hastings. She answered. Hello? Major, I heard what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine, sir. Bullshit. They detained you illegally. I'm filing a formal complaint with... Sir, with respect, I need you to stay out of this. Silence. I appreciate everything you've done, Sarah continued. But if you get involved, Mallory will turn this into a political war, and I can't let you risk your career for me. My career? Hastings' voice was incredulous. You saved my son's life. You think I care about my career? I think you've earned everything you have, and I'm not going to be the reason you lose it. Hastings was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're a stubborn woman, Major. Yes, sir? Fine. I'll stay out of the official channels. But off the record, I'm making calls. And if Mallory thinks he can destroy you without consequences, he's got another thing coming. Sir, that's not a request, Major. That's me telling you how this is going to be. Now get some rest. And if you need anything at all, you call me. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just stay alive long enough to see this through. He hung up. Sarah set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The first rays of sunlight were creeping through the window, painting the walls gold. She'd thought coming to Ashford would mean peace, anonymity, a chance to forget. But you couldn't forget something that defined you. And maybe she didn't want to anymore. Her phone buzzed one more time. Another message from the unknown number. Check your email. You're going to want to see this. Trust me. Sarah grabbed her laptop and opened her email. One new message. No subject line. The sender was a string of random characters, encrypted. She opened it. Inside was a single attachment, a video file, 12 minutes long. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Every instinct screamed at her not to click it, but curiosity won. She hit play. The video was grainy, shot from a security camera mounted high on a wall. The timestamp read, March 18th, 3 years ago. The location, FOB Tanner. The operating tent. Sarah's breath caught. She watched herself on screen, younger, covered in blood, working frantically on a soldier's chest. The camera angle showed the entire room. She could see the chaos, the panic, the way supplies ran out one by one. And then, halfway through the video, something happened that she'd forgotten. A figure entered the tent. Not military. Civilian clothes. A man, older, carrying a briefcase. He spoke to someone off camera. Sarah couldn't hear the audio. And handed over something small. A vial, maybe. The video jumped forward. Now Sarah was working on the girl, the civilian with the abdominal wound. She was using the blood, the 40 units, the ones that had vanished from inventory. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the same man stood watching. And when Sarah finished, when the girl stabilized, the man nodded once. Then he walked out. The video ended. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Someone had been there, someone who'd brought supplies, someone who'd known exactly what she needed and when, and someone had just sent her proof. Her phone rang again, the unknown number. She answered. Who are you? A voice, male, distorted. Someone who knows what really happened in Syria, and someone who's going to make sure Mallory doesn't bury you for it. Why? Because you're not the only one with something to lose, Major, and because what's coming isn't just about you. It's bigger, much bigger. A pause. Stay ready. Things are about to get worse before they get better. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the blank screen where the video had been, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The distorted voice still echoed in her ears. Someone who knows what really happened. The man in the video, the civilian with the briefcase, had been real. Not a hallucination born from exhaustion or trauma. Real. And someone had footage proving it. She replayed the video 3 more times, pausing on the man's face. The angle was bad, the resolution worse. But there were details. Dark hair going gray at the temples. Expensive watch. A scar running along his left jawline. She'd never seen him before that day in Syria. Never saw him after. But he'd known exactly when to show up and what to bring. Her phone buzzed. A text from Keating. Turn on the news. Channel 7. Now. Sarah grabbed the remote and flipped to the local station. The morning anchor sat behind a polished desk, her expression grave. Breaking developments in what's being called the Syria investigation. Senator James Mallory held a press conference less than an hour ago, calling for criminal charges against former Army surgeon Major Sarah Calloway. The senator claims Calloway's actions during a combat operation 3 years ago directly resulted in the death of his nephew, Private First Class Thomas Mallory, along with 2 other soldiers. The screen cut to footage of Mallory standing behind a podium, flanked by American flags. He was older than Sarah expected, mid-60s, silver hair, the kind of face that looked trustworthy on camera. But his eyes were hard. This woman took an oath, Mallory said, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured grief. An oath to protect American soldiers. And she violated that oath. She diverted critical medical supplies away from our troops to save an unidentified civilian, possibly an enemy combatant. 3 young men died because of her decision. 3 families lost sons, brothers, husbands, and for 3 years she's hidden from accountability. That ends today. The camera flashed to reporters shouting questions. Mallory raised a hand. I've been in contact with military prosecutors. We have evidence, supply logs, witness testimony, medical records, that prove Major Calloway acted with criminal negligence. I'm calling for her immediate arrest and trial under military law. No one is above accountability. Not even someone who thinks saving the wrong life justifies losing the right ones. The anchor came back on screen. Riverside General Hospital, where Calloway currently works as a nurse, has declined to comment. We reached out to Calloway herself, but received no response. Legal experts say if charged under military jurisdiction, she could face up to 15 years in prison. Sarah's phone exploded with calls. She silenced it. Her hands were shaking. The news cut to footage from yesterday, the ER, soldiers being wheeled in, chaos. Someone had leaked it. The camera zoomed in on Sarah's face as she worked, her expression cold and focused. The anchor's voiceover continued. Ironically, Calloway made headlines just yesterday for saving the life of Captain David Hastings, son of General William Hastings, during a mass casualty event. But critics are now questioning whether her actions then, or in Syria, represent sound medical judgment or a pattern of reckless decision-making. Sarah shut off the TV. The silence was deafening. Her phone rang. Keating. Did you watch it? Yeah. He's going for your throat. Full media blitz. He's got 3 networks lined up for interviews, a Senate hearing scheduled for next week, and prosecutors are drafting charges as we speak. Keating's voice was sharp, rapid fire. We need to move fast. I'm calling an emergency strategy meeting. Can you get to my office in an hour? I don't think leaving my apartment is a good idea right now. It's not. But staying there is worse. Mallory's counting on you hiding. We need to show strength. Get dressed, keep your head down, and get here. I'll have security ready. Keating, 1 hour, Sarah. Don't make me come get you. The line went dead. Sarah stood in the center of her apartment, surrounded by silence and the weight of everything collapsing. Mallory had just painted a target on her back. Every news outlet would be running her face by noon. Every hospital she'd ever worked at would be digging through her records. Every mistake she'd ever made would be magnified and dissected. But something else nagged at her. The video. The mysterious caller. The man with the briefcase. None of that was random. Someone was playing a deeper game, and she was a piece on a board she couldn't see. She showered fast, dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, and pulled her hair back. No scrubs, no ID badge, nothing that said nurse or military. Just a woman trying to disappear into a crowd. The hallway outside her apartment was empty. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, listening for footsteps. Nothing. She reached the ground floor and peered through the door's narrow window. A news van sat parked across the street, camera crew unloading equipment. Sarah cursed under her breath and pulled out her phone. She texted Keating, "Media outside need alternate exit." The response came seconds later. Loading dock, rear of building, car waiting, black sedan. Driver, will ID himself as Mitchell. Sarah moved through the building's basement hallway, past storage units and laundry rooms that smelled like detergent and mildew. The loading dock door was rusted but unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped into gray morning light. A black sedan idled 10 feet away. The driver's window rolled down. A man in his 40s, buzz cut, military bearing. Calloway? Mitchell? Get in! She slid into the back seat. The car was already moving before she closed the door. Mitchell didn't speak. He drove with the focused efficiency of someone trained in evasive maneuvers, taking side streets and alleys, doubling back twice to check for tails. Sarah watched the city slide past, familiar streets rendered alien by the circumstances. Keating's office was in a low-rise building downtown, tucked between a coffee shop and an insurance agency. Mitchell pulled into an underground garage and parked near a service elevator. "Third floor. She's waiting." Sarah got out. "Thanks." "Don't thank me. Just stay alive long enough for this to be worth it." The elevator doors closed before she could respond. Keating's office was organized chaos. Whiteboards covered in notes, file boxes stacked against walls, 3 laptops running on a conference table. Keating stood in the center of it all, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing sharply at someone Sarah couldn't see. "I don't care what precedent says. Find me a case where—" "Yes, I'll hold." Keating lowered the phone and looked at Sarah. "Sit." Coffee's on the counter. "You look like you need it." Sarah poured a cup and sat. The office smelled like stale air and printer ink. Keating finished her call and tossed the phone onto the table. "All right, here's where we are. Mallory's moved faster than I expected. He's got prosecutors lined up, media support, and half the Senate backing him because they owe him favors. The hearing is in 6 days. We need to dismantle his case before then, or you're walking into an execution." "What's his case?" "Simple. You diverted military blood to a civilian. 3 soldiers died. You acted outside protocol. Criminal negligence at best, dereliction of duty at worst. Keating pulled up a document on one of the laptops and spun it towards Sarah. This is the supply log. 40 units requisitioned, only 12 accounted for. The missing 28 are the smoking gun. Sarah stared at the numbers. I used them. On the girl. Prove it. I can't. There's no record of her. She wasn't logged. She wasn't supposed to be there. Then we've got a problem. Keating leaned back. Without evidence she existed, Mallory's narrative wins. You stole supplies, soldiers died. End of story. What about the video? Keating's eyes narrowed. What video? Sarah pulled out her phone and forwarded the encrypted email. Someone sent me this last night. Security footage from FOB Tanner. It shows a man, civilian, entering the tent with supplies. He gave them to someone off camera. Then I used them on the girl. Keating watched the video twice, her expression unreadable. Who sent this? I don't know. Anonymous. And the man in the footage? Never seen him before, but he knew exactly what I needed and when. Keating paused the video on the man's face. This changes everything. If we can ID him, prove he brought those supplies, we shift the narrative. You weren't stealing, you were using resources provided by a third party. How do we ID him? Facial recognition, military databases. Someone knows who he is. Keating grabbed her phone. I'm sending this to a contact at Defense Intelligence. Someone who doesn't answer to Mallory. You think that'll work? I think it's our only shot. Keating hit send and set the phone down. In the meantime, we prep for the hearing. You need to be ready to testify. Walk me through Syria. Every detail. No omissions. Sarah spent the next 3 hours reliving the worst day of her life. She described the convoy attack, the injuries, the impossible triage. She described the girl, 16, maybe 17, shrapnel through the abdomen, eyes wide with terror. She described the moment she'd made the call. Save the girl or let her die to preserve supplies for soldiers who were already too far gone. Keating listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When Sarah finished, Keating set down her pen. You know what Mallory's going to say. That I chose wrong. That you chose a stranger over Americans. That you broke your oath. Keating leaned forward. Can you defend that? I don't know. Sarah, I made a call. In the moment, with the information I had, it was the right call, but looking back, I don't know. Maybe those soldiers could have been saved if I'd had those units. Maybe not. I'll never know. Sarah's voice cracked. And that's something I live with every day. Keating studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. That's your testimony. Honest, raw, no excuses. Juries and senators respond to truth, even when it's ugly. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. Check your email again. Part 2. She opened her laptop. Another encrypted message. Another video file. This one was longer, 40 minutes. She hit play. The footage was different this time. Not security camera, handheld. Someone filming from inside a vehicle. The timestamp was 2 days before the convoy attack. The location. A compound 20 miles from FOB Tanner. The camera showed men loading crates into trucks. Military-style crates. Medical supplies stamped with U.S. Army insignias. But the men weren't American. They wore civilian clothes. Spoke a language Sarah didn't recognize. The camera zoomed in on one of the crates being opened. Inside, blood bags, plasma, surgical equipment, everything that had gone missing from Phoebe Tanner. The video cut to a new scene, a meeting. The man from the first video, the one with the briefcase and the scar, sat across from 2 others. One wore a military uniform. American. The rank insignia was visible. Colonel. Sarah's stomach dropped. The audio was faint but audible. The colonel spoke first. Supply routes compromised. We're losing 30% to theft before it even reaches the FOBs. Someone's skimming and selling to local contractors. The man with the briefcase nodded. I can reroute. Get the critical supplies directly to your surgeons, but it'll cost. How much? 20% of the shipment. Untraceable. No logs. The colonel hesitated, then nodded. Done. The video ended. Sarah sat frozen, staring at the screen. The supplies hadn't been stolen by her. They'd been stolen before they even reached FOB Tanner. The man with the briefcase had been a black market dealer, rerouting stolen medical equipment back to the bases for a cut, and a colonel had approved it. Keating grabbed the laptop and replayed the video, her face going pale. Jesus Christ, this is corruption at the highest level. That colonel was facilitating black market deals using military supplies. And Mallory's nephew died because the supplies never made it to me in the first place. Exactly. Keating's eyes were sharp now, calculating. Mallory's been blaming you for 3 years, but the real reason his nephew died, someone upstream was stealing the blood before it ever reached the field hospital. Who's the colonel? Keating froze the frame on his face. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. She grabbed her phone and started dialing. Sarah watched, her mind spinning. If this got out, if the truth came to light, it wouldn't just exonerate her. It would blow apart Mallory's entire narrative, expose military corruption, destroy careers. And someone had just handed her the ammunition to do it. But why? Her phone rang. The unknown number again. She answered. Who are you? The distorted voice came through. Someone who was there. Someone who saw what really happened. And someone who's tired of watching good people get sacrificed to protect bad ones. Why now? Why wait 3 years? Because 3 years ago you disappeared, buried yourself in a nowhere town. No one was looking at you. But now? You saved a general's son. Made yourself visible. Mallory came after you. And that gave me the opening I needed. Opening for what? To burn down the system that let 6 soldiers die. Starting with the people who caused it. A pause. Check your email one more time. Final piece. The line went dead. Sarah opened her laptop. Another video. Shorter this time, 5 minutes. The footage showed a Senate office. Mallory sat behind a desk, speaking to someone off camera. The angle suggested a hidden camera, planted by whoever was recording. Mallory's voice was calm, cold. The Callaway investigation is moving forward. I've got prosecutors ready to file charges. Media's on board. She'll be arrested within the week. The off-camera voice responded. And if evidence surfaces that contradicts your narrative? It won't. I've made sure of that. Mallory smiled. The supply officer who could have verified her story is dead. The witnesses are deployed, and the medical records are sealed under national security. Callaway has no defense. What about the general? Hastings is making calls. Hastings is a sentimental fool. He thinks gratitude matters. It doesn't. Politics matters. And I've got enough leverage to bury him if he gets in my way. Mallory leaned back. By the time this is over, Callaway will be in prison. My nephew's death will have justice. And anyone who questions me will think twice. The video ended. Sarah's hands were shaking. Mallory knew. He knew the supplies had been compromised. He knew she wasn't at fault. And he was prosecuting her anyway. Because it was easier to destroy one person than admit the system was broken. Keating watched the video, her expression shifting from shock to rage. He's knowingly prosecuting an innocent woman. That's malicious prosecution, abuse of power, career-ending if it gets out. How do we get it out? Keating's smile was sharp. We don't, not yet. We let him walk into the hearing thinking he's got you cornered. And then we drop all 3 videos in front of the committee, live, on record, broadcasted. He'll see it coming. Not if we do it right. We keep this quiet. No leaks. No warnings. Let him build his case. Let him put you on the stand. And then we detonate everything he's built. Keating grabbed her phone. I need to make calls. Get the committee to subpoena the original supply logs. Get that colonel identified and located. This is going to be a bloodbath. Sarah stood, her legs unsteady. What if it backfires? What if they bury the evidence? Then we go public anyway, leak it to every news outlet that'll listen. But I don't think it'll come to that. Mallory's made enemies, powerful ones. They'll be happy to watch him fall. And the person who sent the videos? Whoever they are, they want the same thing we do, justice. Let's not waste it. The next 6 days were a blur. Keating worked around the clock, pulling records, interviewing former FOB Tanner personnel via encrypted video calls, building a counter-narrative brick by brick. Sarah stayed hidden in a safe house Keating had arranged, a small apartment above a bookstore on the edge of town. No visitors, no calls, just her and the weight of everything about to happen. The colonel in the video was identified. Colonel Raymond Voss, retired 2 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Keating tracked him to a suburb outside Washington, but he refused to talk. No surprise. He had everything to lose. General Hastings called twice. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't afford the distraction. The mystery caller sent one more message the night before the hearing. No video this time, just text. Tomorrow, the truth comes out. Be ready. They'll fight back. But you're not alone. You never were. Sarah read it 3 times, then deleted it. She didn't sleep that night, just sat by the window watching the street below, waiting for dawn. The Senate hearing room was exactly what she expected. Dark wood paneling, rows of seats filled with reporters and spectators, a raised platform where senators sat like judges. Mallory was front and center, flanked by his allies. His expression was calm, confident. Sarah sat at a small table with Keating beside her. Across the aisle, military prosecutors whispered to each other, shuffling papers. The chairman, a gray-haired senator named Whitmore, called the room to order. This hearing is convened to examine allegations of criminal negligence against former Major Sarah Calloway. Senator Mallory, you may begin. Mallory stood. He spoke for 20 minutes, laying out his case with practiced precision. The missing blood. The dead soldiers. Sarah's violation of protocol. He presented the supply logs, the casualty reports, witness statements from personnel who'd been at FOB Tanner but hadn't seen the girl. This isn't about politics, Mallory said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. This is about accountability. 3 families lost loved ones because Major Calloway prioritized a stranger over American soldiers. That's not a judgment call. That's a betrayal. He sat down to murmurs of agreement from the gallery. Whitmore turned to Sarah. Major Calloway, you'll have an opportunity to respond. But first, the committee has questions. The grilling started. Senators demanded details, dates, explanations. Sarah answered each question carefully, sticking to the facts. Yes, she'd used the blood on a civilian. No, she didn't regret it. Yes, soldiers had died. No, she didn't believe they would have survived even with the additional units. An hour in, Mallory leaned forward. Major, you claim this girl existed, but there's no record of her, no name, no documentation, no follow-up. How do we know you didn't simply misuse supplies and fabricate this story to cover yourself? Sarah met his eyes. Because I'm not a liar. That's not evidence. Then let me provide some. Keating stood. Mr. Chairman, if I may, we have new evidence relevant to this case. Video footage obtained independently that contradicts Senator Mallory's narrative. Whitmore frowned. What kind of footage? Security footage from FOB Tanner and recordings of conversations relevant to the supply chain failures that led to the deaths Senator Mallory is attributing to my client. Mallory's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his jaw tighten. Objection, one of the prosecutors said. This evidence wasn't disclosed in discovery. Because it was obtained 48 hours ago, Keating said smoothly. We're disclosing it now. Whitmore hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. Keating connected her laptop to the room's display system. The first video played, the security footage showing the man with the briefcase entering the tent. The room went silent. The second video followed, the black market deal. The colonel approving the scheme. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The third video, Mallory in his office, admitting he knew the supplies had been compromised but was prosecuting Sarah anyway, played last. The room erupted. Mallory shot to his feet. This is a fabrication. That's your voice, Senator, Keating said calmly. Your office, your words. The metadata has been verified. This footage is authentic. Whitmore slammed his gavel. Order, Senator Mallory, sit down. Mallory stood frozen, his face red. This is entrapment. This is evidence, Keating said. Evidence that Major Calloway was working with compromised supplies due to systemic corruption she had no knowledge of. Evidence that the deaths Senator Mallory attributes to her were caused by failures at levels far above her authority. And evidence that Senator Mallory has been knowingly prosecuting an innocent woman to cover up that corruption. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Senators argued. Mallory stood in the center of it all, his carefully constructed case crumbling in real time. Whitmore slammed the gavel repeatedly. This hearing is in recess. Senator Mallory, you will remain available for questioning by the Ethics Committee. Major Calloway, you're dismissed pending further review. Sarah stood on shaking legs. Keating gripped her arm. Let's go, now. They pushed through to the crowd, cameras flashing, reporters shouting. Sarah kept her head down, letting Keating navigate. They made it to the hallway before Mallory caught up. This isn't over, he hissed. Sarah stopped, turned, looked him in the eye. Yes, it is. She walked away. Outside, the steps of the Senate building were packed with media. Keating held up a hand. No questions. We'll issue a statement later. But Sarah stopped. She looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at the watching crowd. I made a call in Syria, she said, her voice steady. I saved a girl's life. And for 3 years I've been told that was wrong, that I should have let her die. But I'm a doctor. My job is to save lives. All lives. And I won't apologize for that. Not to Senator Mallory. Not to anyone. She descended the steps, Keating beside her, and disappeared into the waiting car. The fallout was immediate. By nightfall, Mallory had resigned from the Armed Services Committee. By morning, the Ethics Committee had opened a formal investigation. By the end of the week, Colonel Voss was arrested on corruption charges, and Sarah Calloway became the most talked-about person in America. But in her small apartment above the bookstore, she sat alone, staring at her phone. One final message from the unknown number. You did it. The system's broken, but you cracked it. Now comes the hard part, deciding what's next. You've got options. All of them are yours. A friend who was there from the beginning. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. Who are you really? The response came instantly. Someone who owed you a debt, and now it's paid. Goodbye, Major. And thank you. The number went dead, disconnected, untraceable. Sarah set down the phone and looked out the window at the city lights. She'd been vindicated, freed. But the cost, the exposure, the scrutiny, the weight of being visible was just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, someone who knew everything was watching, waiting. For what, she didn't know. But she had a feeling she'd find out soon. Sarah stared at her phone screen long after the message disappeared, the weight of those final words settling into her chest like stones. Someone who owed you a debt. And now it's paid. She'd been vindicated, freed from accusations that had haunted her for 3 years. But freedom, she was discovering, came with its own kind of emptiness. The mystery caller had vanished as completely as they'd appeared, leaving only questions and the faint echo of gratitude that felt too small for what had just happened. She set the phone down and walked to the window. The city stretched below her, lights flickering like stars that had fallen to earth. Somewhere out there, Mallory was watching his career disintegrate in real time. Voss was probably negotiating his plea deal, naming everyone he could think of to save his own skin. And Sarah Calloway, the woman they'd tried to erase, was standing in a small apartment above a bookstore, wondering what the hell she was supposed to do now. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. She looked older than she remembered, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Gray streaks in her hair she'd stopped bothering to cover, the face of someone who'd been through a war and barely made it out. But there was something else too, something she hadn't seen in a long time, a hardness in her eyes that wasn't exhaustion or defeat. It was steel, the kind that got forged in fire. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. General Hastings. She answered. General? Major. His voice was rough, like he'd been talking for hours. I saw the news, all of it. The videos, Mallory's resignation, the ethics committee announcement. I wanted to call earlier, but things have been... He paused. My son's awake. Really awake. Talking, eating, complaining about hospital food. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm glad. Glad? Hastings laughed, but it was shaky. You saved his life twice. Once on that table, once by exposing the corruption that would have buried you both. And all you can say is you're glad? What else is there to say? How about you're welcome? How about acknowledging that you did something extraordinary? His voice sharpened. I've been making calls all day. The Joint Chiefs want to meet with you. The Secretary of Defense wants a briefing. There's talk of a formal commendation, maybe even reinstatement with full honors and a promotion. Sarah closed her eyes. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I don't want any of that. What do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked around the small apartment, the borrowed furniture, the empty walls, the life she'd built out of necessity rather than choice. What did she want? 3 years ago, she'd wanted to disappear. Mission accomplished. But now? I don't know, she said quietly. I just know I can't go back to being invisible. Not after this. Then don't. Hastings' voice softened. Come to Washington. Meet with the brass. Hear what they have to say. You don't have to accept anything. Just listen. And if I say no, then you say no. But do it after you know what you're turning down. He paused. You've been running for 3 years, Major. Maybe it's time to stop. The line went quiet. Sarah pressed the phone against her ear, listening to Hastings breathe on the other end. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I'm asking. I'll send you the details. And Major, whatever you decide, thank you for everything. He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stood by the window for another hour, watching the city lights blur and sharpen as clouds drifted past. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. What came next? Vindication didn't come with a roadmap. It didn't tell you how to rebuild a life that had been blown apart. It just left you standing in the wreckage, responsible for figuring out what to do with the pieces. Sleep didn't come that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the last week on an endless loop. The ER. The surgery. Ross in the parking lot. The hearing. Mallory's face when the videos played. The moment everything she'd buried clawed its way back to the surface and refused to be ignored anymore. At 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Her phone was already buzzing with messages. Keating had sent a dozen texts overnight. Media's going insane. 20 interview requests in the last hour. CNN wants you for prime time. So does Fox. And about a dozen print outlets. How do you want to handle this? Sarah typed back. I don't. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, that's not an option. You're the story now. Either you control the narrative or someone else does. Your choice. Sarah stared at the message. Keating was right. She'd spent 3 years letting other people define her. Brennan's incompetent nurse, Mallory's scapegoat, the invisible woman no one bothered to see. If she stayed silent now, the media would fill in the blanks. They'd make her into whatever story sold clicks. She typed, set up 1 interview, someone credible. Not sensational. I'll do it once. That's it. Keating's response came immediately. I'll make it happen. And Sarah, you're doing the right thing. Sarah wasn't sure about that, but she was sure that hiding wasn't an option anymore. The coffee burned her throat, but she drank it anyway, letting the heat ground her. Her laptop sat on the small kitchen table, closed. She opened it and pulled up her email. Hundreds of unread messages. Most were from reporters. Some were from medical organizations. A few were from former colleagues who'd gone silent 3 years ago and suddenly remembered her name. One stood out. The subject line read, From a Grateful Father. Sarah clicked it open. Dr. Calloway, you don't know me. My name is James Rourke. My daughter Emily was in the ER last week when the convoy arrived. She was there for a broken arm, nothing serious. But she saw everything that happened. She saw the chaos. She saw the doctors panicking, and she saw you step forward and save that captain's life. Emily wants to be a doctor someday. She's 16 and she's been talking about it for years, but last week was the first time she saw what that really means. Not the glamorous TV version. The real thing. The impossible decisions and the blood and the pressure. And she saw you handle it like it was just another day. She came home and told me she wants to be like you. Strong, calm, unshakable. I wanted you to know that whatever you're going through right now, and I've seen the news, so I know it's a lot, you made an impact on my daughter that she'll carry for the rest of her life. Thank you. James. Sarah read the email 3 times. Then she closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. She'd spent 3 years convinced that everything she'd done in Syria had been a mistake, that saving the girl instead of preserving supplies for soldiers had been the wrong call, that she'd been selfish or reckless, or both. But Malik's daughter was alive, studying medicine. And now some 16-year-old in Montana wanted to be a doctor because she'd watched Sarah refuse to let someone die. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the weight wasn't about the people you couldn't save. Maybe it was about carrying them forward so the people you did save had a chance to matter. The interview happened 3 days later in a quiet studio in downtown Helena. The journalist was a woman named Rebecca Torres. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, a reputation for asking hard questions without turning interviews into ambushes. Sarah sat across from her in a chair that felt too small, lights too bright, the whole setup designed to make her feel exposed. Which, she supposed, was the point. Torres started gentle. Major Calloway, thank you for agreeing to talk with us. I know the last few days have been difficult. That's one word for it. Let's start at the beginning. 3 years ago, you left the military under circumstances that were never fully explained. Can you tell us what happened? Sarah took a breath. This was it. The moment where she either owned her story or let someone else twist it into something unrecognizable. I was stationed at Forward Operating Base Tanner in Syria. A convoy got hit. 6 casualties came in, all critical. I was the lead surgeon, and I had to make choices, impossible choices, about who got what resources when there wasn't enough to go around. She paused, steadying herself. I saved a civilian girl with supplies that some people think should have gone to soldiers. 3 of those soldiers died, and for 3 years I've been told that my choice made me a criminal. But you don't believe that. I believe I did my job. My job was to save lives. Not American lives or civilian lives or any other category, just lives. And I did that with what I had. Sarah's voice hardened. What I didn't know, what no one knew until this week, was that the reason I didn't have enough supplies wasn't because of my decisions. It was because officers above me were running a black market operation, stealing medical equipment and selling it for profit. Torres leaned forward. The videos that surfaced during the Senate hearing showed extensive corruption. Colonel Voss has been arrested. Multiple investigations are underway. But Senator Mallory's role in all this is particularly troubling. He knew about the corruption, but chose to prosecute you anyway. Why do you think he did that? Because it was easier to blame one person than fix a broken system. Because his nephew died and he needed someone to be responsible. And because prosecuting a disgraced military surgeon was politically convenient. Sarah met Torres's eyes. But here's what I want people to understand. This isn't about me versus Mallory. This is about what happens when powerful people prioritize optics over truth, when they'd rather destroy someone than admit the system failed. You sound angry. I'm angry. 6 people died in Syria because supplies that should have saved them were being stolen and sold. And instead of investigating that, the military buried it. Mallory buried it. And I became the scapegoat. Sarah's voice didn't waver. So yeah, I'm angry, and I think I've earned the right to be. Torres nodded slowly. What's next for you? The military has offered reinstatement. Are you going back? I don't know yet. What would it take for you to go back? Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she said, proof that things have changed, that the system that failed those soldiers and failed me has been fixed. I'm not interested in being part of something that values politics over people. And if they can't prove that, then I'll find somewhere else to save lives. The interview aired that night. Sarah didn't watch it. She sat in her apartment with the TV off, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the fallout. It came faster than expected. Her phone exploded with messages. Some supportive, some vicious, most from strangers who felt entitled to an opinion about her life. She turned it to silent and left it on the counter. At midnight, unable to sleep, she walked to the 24-hour diner 2 blocks from her apartment, the same one where Ross had confronted her. It felt like a lifetime ago. She slid into a booth in the back and ordered coffee she didn't need. The waitress, different from last time, younger, brought it with a cautious smile. You're her, aren't you? The doctor from the news. Sarah's jaw tightened. Yeah, my brother's in the army, deployed right now. Afghanistan. The waitress set down the cup carefully. What you said in that interview about the system failing soldiers, he talks about that all the time. How supplies go missing, how they're always short on everything they need. He says it's been happening for years, but nobody listens. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just thank you for saying what nobody else would. The waitress hesitated. Coffee's on me tonight. She walked away before Sarah could respond. Sarah sat in the booth until 3 a.m, drinking coffee and watching the occasional car drift past outside. The diner was nearly empty, just her, a trucker at the counter, and a couple in a corner booth speaking in whispers. Her phone buzzed on the table. She'd left it on silent, but the screen lit up. A text from a blocked number. You were magnificent. Sarah's pulse quickened. The mystery caller. She typed back immediately. Who are you? Really? The response took 5 minutes. Someone who was in that tent in Syria. Someone who saw what you did for that girl. Someone who spent 3 years trying to make sure you didn't go down for doing the right thing. Sarah's hands trembled. You're the man in the video, the one with the briefcase. No, but I worked with him. He's dead now, killed 2 years ago for trying to expose the corruption. I've been finishing what he started. Why? Because he believed people like you, people who actually give a damn, are worth protecting, and because I owed him. What was his name? The reply came after a long silence. Malik. His name was Malik, and the girl you saved was his daughter. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. The world tilted sideways. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying to process what she was reading. The girl. The one she'd used the blood on. The one who'd vanished after surgery. Malik's daughter. Is she alive? Yes. Living in Jordan with family. She's studying medicine. Wants to be a surgeon like the woman who saved her life. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She wiped them away with the heel of her hand, fingers shaking. The waitress glanced over but didn't approach. Thank you. For telling me. For everything. You gave her a second chance. I just made sure you got yours. We're even now. Sarah stared at the screen, waiting for more. But the conversation ended there. No goodbye. No final message. Just silence. She sat in that booth for another hour, crying quietly, not caring who saw. The girl was alive. Not just alive, thriving, becoming a doctor. All because Sarah had made an impossible choice and refused to apologize for it even when it destroyed her. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe you don't get to know if you made the right call. You just make it and live with the consequences and hope that somewhere down the line, it mattered. When she finally left the diner, the sky was starting to lighten, dawn creeping across the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Sarah walked back to her apartment slowly, feeling the weight of the last 3 years pressing down on her shoulders. But it felt different now. Not crushing, just heavy. The kind of weight you could carry if you learned how to distribute it properly. Her phone rang as she unlocked her door. Keating. Did you see the news? No. Why? Mallory's being indicted. Federal prosecutors filed charges an hour ago. Abuse of power, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud. He's looking at 15 to 20 years. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against the doorframe. Good. Voss flipped completely. He's naming everyone involved in the supply theft operation. At least 18 officers are under investigation now. The Pentagon's in full crisis mode. They're launching an independent review of supply chains across all overseas bases. Keating paused. You did this. You exposed the whole thing. I didn't do it alone. No, but you're the one who refused to stay buried. That counts for something. Keating's voice softened. How are you holding up? I don't know. Ask me in a week. Fair enough. Get some rest. We'll talk soon. Sarah ended the call and stepped inside her apartment. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through the windows. She made more coffee she didn't need and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Her laptop was still open to that email from James Rourke. His daughter Emily wanted to be a doctor because of her. Malik's daughter was studying medicine because of her. And somewhere out there, Hastings' son was recovering because she'd refused to let him die. Maybe that was enough. Maybe you didn't need to save everyone. Maybe you just needed to save the ones you could and trust that it would ripple outward in ways you'd never see. 3 days later, Sarah drove to Riverside General. She hadn't been back since the hearing, hadn't wanted to face the stares or the whispers or the awkward conversations with people who'd treated her like she was invisible for 3 years. But Hale had called, asked her to come in, said it was important. She parked in the lot where Ross had confronted her and sat in the car for 10 minutes, gathering courage. Then she got out and walked inside. The reception area was busy, families waiting, phones ringing, the controlled chaos of a hospital at midday. The receptionist looked up and did a double take. Dr. Calloway, Sarah's fine. The woman nodded nervously. Dr. Hale wanted to be notified when you arrived. I'll call him. I know where his office is. She walked through corridors that felt both familiar and alien. 3 years of keeping her head down, staying invisible, moving through these halls like a ghost. Now people stared openly. A nurse whispered to a colleague. 2 residents stopped mid-conversation to watch her pass. She found Hale in his office, door open, buried under charts. He looked up when she appeared. "Calloway? Hell of a week." "You could say that." "Come in. Close the door." She did. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. "Coffee?" he asked. "I've had enough coffee to kill a horse." Hale smiled faintly. "I watched your interview. You didn't pull any punches." "Didn't see the point." "Good." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "Because I'm not going to pull any either. This is an offer, not from me, from the board." Sarah opened it. Inside was a contract, chief of trauma surgery, full authority over the department, salary that made her eyes widen. Benefits, autonomy, complete control over hiring, protocols, budget allocation. "They want you to rebuild the program," Hale said, "from the ground up. Hire your own team, set your own standards, run it however you see fit. No interference from administration." Sarah stared at the numbers on the page. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person in this hospital who's proven they'll do what's right even when it costs them everything. That's the kind of leadership trauma surgery needs." He paused. "And because what you did for Hastings' son showed everyone here that you're not just good. You're exceptional." "I haven't practiced surgery in 3 years." "You practiced it last week, and you were flawless." Hale leaned forward. "Look, I know you've got options. The military wants you back. Probably half a dozen hospitals are lining up offers. But I'm asking you to stay here, in Ashford, where you've already proven you can make a difference." Sarah ran her fingers over the contract. Chief of Trauma Surgery. 3 years ago, before Syria, before everything fell apart, this was the kind of position she'd dreamed about. Now it just felt complicated. What happened to Brennan? Resigned. Board asked for it after everything came out. She's done. Hale's expression was neutral. For what it's worth, I think she knew she screwed up, but by the time she figured it out, it was too late. "And you're okay with this? Me coming in at that level?" "Calloway, you saved my ass during that mass casualty event. I'm not too proud to admit when someone's better at something than I am. You belong in trauma surgery. I belong in the ER. We'll both do better if we're playing to our strengths." Sarah closed the folder. "I need time." "Take it, but not too long. This hospital needs you, and I think—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "I think you need this too." She left the hospital with the contract tucked under her arm and drove without a destination. The roads around Ashford were quiet, mountains still capped with snow, even though it was late spring. She ended up at a small overlook on the edge of town, parked, and got out. The valley stretched below her, the town nestled in its center like something out of a postcard. 3 years she'd been here. 3 years of hiding, of keeping her head down, of trying to convince herself that being invisible was the same as being safe. It wasn't. It was just another kind of prison. Her phone buzzed, a text from Peters. "Heard about the job offer. Take it. You're wasted doing anything else." She typed back, "You don't think I've been out too long?" His response came immediately. "You perform better in that OR than half the surgeons I've worked with who've been practicing continuously." "You haven't lost it. You just forgot you had it." Sarah pocketed her phone and sat on the hood of her car, staring out at the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere below, Riverside General was dealing with its evening rush. Nurses and doctors making impossible calls, carrying weight they'd never asked for. She thought about Malik, about his daughter in Jordan, studying to become the surgeon who'd saved her life. About Emily Rourke, wanting to be like the woman she'd watched step forward when everyone else froze. About Hastings' son recovering in a hospital bed because Sarah had refused to let him die. And she thought about the 6 soldiers in Syria, the ones she couldn't save, the ones whose names would be carved into her memory until the day she died. You couldn't erase loss, couldn't undo it or outrun it. You could only carry it forward and hope it taught you something about what mattered. She pulled out her phone and called Hale. He answered on the second ring. "Calloway, I'll take the job, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I want a memorial in the ER for the 6 soldiers who died in Syria, Their names, ranks, dates of service. So everyone who works here remembers what happens when systems fail and good people pay the price. Hale was quiet for a moment. Done. What else? I want to build a training program, real training, for trauma surgeons working in resource-limited environments. Combat medicine, disaster response, field surgery, the whole thing. Taught by people who've actually done it, not academics who've only read about it. That's ambitious. That's necessary. If we're going to rebuild this department, we're going to do it right. No shortcuts, no politics, just medicine. Agreed. She could hear the smile in his voice. When can you start? 2 weeks. I need to settle some things first. 2 weeks. I'll have your office ready. And Calloway? Welcome home. Sarah hung up and sat on the hood of her car until the stars came out. Then she drove back to her apartment, packed her laptop and the contract, and started making a list of everything she'd need to do. The memorial went up first. Sarah worked with a local stone carver to design it, 6 names carved into polished black granite, set into the wall outside the main ER entrance. Beneath the names, a simple inscription. They gave everything. We remember. The unveiling happened on a gray morning 2 months after Sarah started. The entire hospital staff turned out, nurses, doctors, administrative personnel, even some patients who'd heard about it. Hastings flew in with his son. Peters and Ortiz drove up from their base. Sarah stood in front of the memorial with her hand pressed against Private First Class Thomas Mallory's name. I couldn't save you, she said quietly, knowing everyone was listening. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But I promise you this. No one who works in this hospital will ever forget what it cost. What you gave. What all of you gave. She stepped back. Hastings moved forward and saluted the wall. His son followed. Then Peters and Ortiz. One by one, the staff came forward, some touching the names, some standing in silence, some crying. Sarah watched from the side, feeling the weight of it press down on her chest. But it was a different kind of weight now. Not crushing. Shared. Distributed across all these people who'd chosen to remember. That night, she sat in her new office on the 3rd floor of Riverside General, reviewing applications for her training program. She'd put out the call 3 weeks ago, looking for surgeons with field experience, combat medics willing to teach, anyone who'd worked in conditions where everything was stacked against you and you had to figure it out anyway. The response had been overwhelming. 200 applications for 20 spots. She was reading through them one by one, looking for people who understood that medicine wasn't about perfect conditions and unlimited resources. It was about doing the best you could with what you had and refusing to give up even when it looked hopeless. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Dr. Calloway? A woman's voice, young, accented. Yes, my name is Amira. Amira Khalil. I think you saved my life 3 years ago in Syria. Sarah's breath caught. Amira, my father told me about you before he died. He said you used supplies you weren't supposed to use, that you made a choice that cost you everything, and that because of you I'm alive. The girl's voice broke. I wanted to thank you, and to tell you that I'm in my 2nd year of medical school. I'm going to be a surgeon, like you. Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Amira, I didn't know if you'd survived. After the surgery, you disappeared, and I survived because of you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that matters, making sure other people survive too. Amira paused. My father said you were the bravest person he ever met. He was right. Your father was a good man. He was. And he believed in you, even when no one else did. Amira's voice steadied. I just wanted you to know that what you did, it rippled. It's still rippling, and it always will. They talked for another 20 minutes, about medical school, about Syria, about the weight of carrying impossible choices forward. When they finally hung up, Sarah sat in her office staring at the phone. Malik's daughter. Alive. Thriving. Becoming the doctor Sarah had risked everything to give her a chance to be. Maybe that was the point of all of it. Maybe you made the hard calls and lived with the consequences and trusted that somewhere, somehow, it would matter to someone. The training program launched 4 months later. Sarah had assembled a team, Peters, Ortiz, 3 combat medics with a combined 40 years of field experience, and 2 disaster response surgeons who'd worked everywhere from Haiti to Nepal. The curriculum was brutal. 12 weeks of instruction covering everything from triage and mass casualty events to emergency surgery without backup or proper equipment. The first class had 20 students, residents and practicing surgeons who'd heard about the program and wanted in. Sarah stood in front of them on the first day and laid it out plainly. This isn't medical school. This isn't about memorizing protocols or acing exams. This is about learning to function when everything's falling apart, when you don't have enough supplies or time or support, when the choices you make mean someone lives or someone dies. She paused. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. You're going to see things that haunt you, make calls that keep you up at night, and you're going to carry that weight for the rest of your career. One of the students, a resident named Jackson, raised his hand. So why do it? Sarah met his eyes. Because someone has to. Because people are dying in places where the system has failed them, and they need doctors who know how to function anyway. Because I've been there. I've made those calls, and I've seen what happens when good people refuse to give up, even when everything says they should. She told them about Syria, about the convoy, about the choice she'd made and the 3 years of hell that followed. She told them about Mallory and Voss and the corruption that had cost 6 soldiers their lives. And she told them about Amira, about the girl who was alive because Sarah had refused to let protocol override conscience. You're going to make impossible choices, she said, and some of them are going to haunt you. But if you walk away from this program knowing how to save one more life than you would have otherwise, if you can look at a situation where everyone says it's hopeless and find a way forward anyway, then it's worth it. The students were silent when she finished. Then Jackson spoke again. How do you live with it? The ones you can't save? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Badly. But you live. You carry them forward. You make sure their loss teaches you something, and you save the next one, and the one after that, until eventually the weight becomes something you know how to carry. The program ran every quarter. By the end of the first year, 80 surgeons had completed it. They went on to work in combat zones, disaster areas, underserved communities, places where resources were scarce and the need was overwhelming. And every one of them carried something Sarah had taught them, that medicine wasn't about perfect conditions. It was about refusing to give up even when everything said you should. General Hastings visited Riverside on the 1-year anniversary of his son's surgery. He found Sarah in the training facility, watching her students work through a simulated mass casualty scenario. She stood with her arms crossed, calling out complications, watching how they adapted. Dr. Calloway? She turned. General? David wanted to come, but he's deployed. Sent this instead. Hastings handed her an envelope. Sarah opened it. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting. Dr. Calloway, I'm writing this from somewhere I can't name, doing work I can't describe. But I wanted you to know that every day I'm here, I think about what you did for me. About how you refused to let me die even when it looked hopeless. I'm alive because you made an impossible call and stood by it. I'm here, serving, because you gave me that chance. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you anyway. Captain David Hastings. Sarah folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Tell him I'm proud of him. I will. Hastings watched the students for a moment. You've built something remarkable here. This program. It's changing how trauma surgeons think about their work. The Pentagon's taken notice. They want to implement something similar across all military medical facilities. Good, they should. Hastings smiled. There's something else, the Medal of Valor ceremony. It's scheduled for next month, Pentagon, full honors. Sarah had been expecting this. Hastings had mentioned it before, but she'd been putting off giving an answer. I don't need a medal. It's not about what you need, it's about what you've earned. Hastings' voice was firm. You saved my son. You exposed systemic corruption. You've trained surgeons who are saving lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. That deserves recognition. I'm just doing my job. No, you're doing more than your job. You're changing the standard. He paused. The ceremony is not optional, Major. The Secretary of Defense has already signed off. You're receiving the Medal of Valor whether you want it or not. Sarah looked at him, at this man who'd stormed into her ER a year ago, desperate and furious, and who now stood in her training facility talking about medals and recognition like she was someone who deserved them. All right, she said finally. "I'll be there." The ceremony was everything Sarah had expected and nothing she was prepared for. The Pentagon's main auditorium filled with brass and politicians and journalists. She stood in her dress uniform, the one with lieutenant colonel insignia that still felt foreign, while Hastings gave a speech about courage and service and the importance of standing up when it would be easier to stay down. "Major Sarah Calloway made a choice in Syria," Hastings said, his voice carrying across the room. "A choice that cost her everything, her career, her reputation, 3 years of her life. But that choice saved a young girl who's now studying to become a surgeon. It exposed corruption that had been killing American soldiers, and it reminded all of us what true courage looks like." He called her forward. She walked across the platform, her legs steady, her head high. Hastings pinned the Medal of Valor to her chest. "For extraordinary service in the face of adversity," he said. "For saving lives when others said it couldn't be done. For standing when others told you to fall. For refusing to let injustice stand. The United States military honors Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Calloway." The applause was deafening. Sarah stood there feeling the weight of the medal, the eyes of everyone watching, the years of hiding stripped away completely. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was here, present, seen. And for the first time in 3 years, that didn't scare her. That night, after the ceremony, after the reception, after she'd shaken hands with more generals and politicians than she could count, Sarah stood outside the Pentagon looking up at the stars. Her phone buzzed with congratulations from people she hadn't heard from in years. She ignored all of them except one. "Keating, you looked like a warrior up there. Proud of you." Sarah smiled and typed back. "Thanks for everything. Couldn't have done it without you." "You did it yourself. I just kept you out of jail." Sarah laughed and pocketed her phone. Then she stood there for a while longer, feeling the night air on her face, the metal heavy against her chest. She thought about the 6 soldiers in Syria, about Malik, about Amira studying medicine in Jordan, about Hastings' son deployed somewhere dangerous, about Emily Rourke and the 80 surgeons who'd completed her program and all the lives they'd go on to save. You couldn't undo loss, couldn't erase the weight of impossible choices, but you could carry it forward and turn it into something that mattered. Something that rippled outward in ways you'd never see. That was enough. It had to be. Sarah flew back to Montana the next morning. When she walked into Riverside General, the ER was in controlled chaos, 3 traumas at once, nurses rushing, residents shouting orders. She dropped her bag in her office and headed straight down. Hale saw her coming and grinned. "Welcome back, Colonel. How was Washington?" "Exhausting. What do we have?" "MVA, 3 critical. 1's coding right now." Sarah pulled on gloves without breaking stride. "Which bay?" "2. She pushed through the doors into Trauma Bay 2. The monitor was screaming flatline. A resident was doing compressions, sweat dripping down his face. Another was fumbling with the defibrillator. Sarah took one look at the scene and her training kicked in. "Move!" Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The resident stepped back. Sarah positioned her hands on the patient's chest, exactly the right spot, no hesitation, and started compressions. "Charged to 200. "Ma'am, we already do it!" They charged. Sarah shocked. The patient's body arced off the table. The monitor stuttered. 1 beep, 2, then steady. The room exhaled collectively. Sarah stepped back, stripped off her gloves, and looked at the resident who'd been doing compressions. "You were 2 inches too high. Work on your hand placement." "Yes, ma'am." She walked out of the trauma bay and found Hale waiting in the hall. "Hell of a first day back," he said. "Just another day in trauma." Sarah pulled off her trauma gown. "What's next?" 2 more inbound. ETA 10 minutes. "Then we'd better get ready." They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, the ER a constant flow of broken people needing fixing. Sarah moved through it with the easy confidence of someone who'd found their place in the world. The calls were still impossible. The weight was still heavy. But she knew how to carry it now. At midnight, her shift ended. She walked out to the parking lot, exhausted and covered in blood that wasn't hers. The memorial wall caught the light from the street lamps, the names carved into stone glinting softly. She stopped in front of it and pressed her hand against Private First Class Thomas Mallory's name. "We had 15 traumas today," she said quietly. "Saved 13 of them, lost 2. 1 was too far gone when they arrived. The other coded during surgery, and we couldn't bring them back. She paused. I thought you should know that we're trying, that we're getting better, that your loss mattered. The stone was cold under her palm. She stood there for another moment, then walked to her car. 3 years ago, she'd been broken. Running. Convinced that the weight of her choices would crush her if she stopped moving. Now she stood still, carried the weight openly, refused to apologize for the impossible calls she'd made, because that's what doctors do. They make choices no one should have to make. They carry losses no one should have to carry, and they keep going anyway because people need them to. Sarah Calloway had spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to outrun the weight of Syria and the ghosts of people she couldn't save. But running hadn't fixed anything. It had just made her invisible. Now she was visible. Undeniably, irrevocably visible. And she'd learned something that no medal or recognition or vindication could teach. You don't save everyone. You can't. The system fails. Resources run out. People die despite your best efforts. But you save the ones you can. And you carry the ones you couldn't forward, so their loss means something. So it teaches you to be better, to fight harder, to refuse to give up even when everything says you should. That was the lesson. That was the weight. That was the price of choosing to matter. And Sarah Calloway had finally stopped running from it. She drove home through empty streets, the medal still in her dress uniform hanging in the back seat, the memory of 13 lives saved pressing gently against the 2 she'd lost. Tomorrow, there would be more traumas, more impossible calls, more weight to carry. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Calloway went to sleep knowing exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. She was a surgeon, a teacher, a woman who'd been broken and refused to stay that way. She was someone who mattered, and that finally, completely, undeniably, was enough.